Going back to time management for a second, I was meeting with a client last week
Mhm.
and he was pretty much, I'm overwhelmed. I need to help me create more time in my day. And I'm like, I cannot help you create more time. I can help you like use your time better. And he's a fairly recent client that I mostly work with in individual coaching. And I say, let's look at your calendar. Let's do an activity and let's
Yeah.
kind of like track your meetings, how you use your time and so on. And I give that to him as a homework before a following meeting. And the next meeting was last week. And the thing is, something that I saw with the pandemic is the
Mhm.
multiplication of meeting because meeting on Zoom is so
Yes.
easy.
Yes.
And for some of them, their calendar is still overly inflated for that from that era of remote work where we'll just have too many touch base. I remember
Yep.
when I was working in a think tank at that time, we had a full team touch base on a daily basis. And
Mhm.
eventually we decreased to twice a week and once a week. And essentially what you managed to do in about half an hour is remove half of his meeting.
Yeah.
And that was 16 more hours in his week to do something else that
Yeah.
would actually generate more value, like strategic planning, which was one of his goals and all. So sometimes it's just about taking a really cold, hard look and a step back at where you're investing your time and what you can actually do to reshuffle things and what I like to call delegating to the floor. Or there are things that you can just drop.
Yeah, I love that.
Not to anyone, just like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be done.
All right. Welcome back to our next episode of Lead for Performance. I am thrilled to welcome Simon Blanchette to the studio today. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, Sandra. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here as well and having this conversation. I've been following your work, and I think you're doing some very interesting work in this space as well. Really insightful interviews.
Awesome. Well, I know that I get to talk to an expert in the field today, and I am thrilled about that to really hear your thoughts on the subject. So you have a very fascinating trifecta of experience that
Mm.
you're bringing to the conversation today. You are actively teaching future leaders at McGill and Concordia, I'm sure beyond as well, researching workforce trends actively. And also, you are consulting with organizations, so actively working to put these, probably best practices in action. So, how does wearing all three of these hats really inform your perspective on what's going on in leadership development today?
That's a really good question because I get that question a lot because it seems like I do a lot and sometimes it seems maybe somewhat disconnected, but there's a really strong thread at the heart of all of it. It's kind of a deep interest in knowledge, in education, and training.
Hmm.
And I always say that my research informs my teaching, my
Yeah.
consulting, my education, but at the same time, my time facing with clients, with leaders in the field as well, both in Montreal, but also internationally, because I do business globally, is
Hmm.
also deeply informing my research. How
Yeah.
can we actually focus and design research projects that will be collecting data and turning into actionable best practices and ways forward for a leader? So for me, it's really a neat ecosystem of trying to create good research, but at the same time, full research. Because sometimes when you're in academia, there's a bit that
Yeah.
tendency of being in an ivory tower. And I don't want to be that way. You know, I'm a business researcher, I'm a business academic. So my goal is to be able to have an impact on businesses and to have an impact on decision makers. I worked in organizations, small and large. Now I research them and I consult for them. So my goal is really to be able to make a difference in a
Yeah.
meaningful way.
I mean, I totally get that. And I really appreciate that, thoughtful, multi approach view. Because I absolutely think, knowing all the things doesn't mean you can do them, right? So,
Mm,
it kind of helps you connect the gap. And like when you know what should work, seeing it in action is a super powerful test and
yes.
enforcer, right? And same with then, okay, can you teach it and see what they're doing? And I bet your students are also teaching you some stuff back these days.
Oh, definitely. Like it's a shared community of practice. My
Yeah.
clients as well, and I always tell them because sometimes academics, some of them have never worked in an organization. I've worked in small and large corporations, so I know what they're facing. I know the
Yes.
challenges, the barriers, and I know how they're evolving at the same time as well. So I try to have like a really, really grounded approach, and I do believe that whether you're a consultant, a leader, a professor, a great deal of humility is necessary because you can learn
Yes.
from anyone.
Yes.
It's a continuous cycle of improving, learning. I say that one of the biggest tools that we have is just like go and have coffee chat with people, with anyone, and ask them about their experiences, what they're facing. And
Hmm.
my favorite question for any person that I meet who works or run a business is like, what are your pain points? You know,
Yeah.
what are your barriers currently, or what could actually go better?
Yeah.
Because it's food for thought for my practice, but also for my research.
So let's take advantage of this multi-pronged approach that you have. And let me ask you, like, what surprises you most about the gap
Mm.
between what research shows about effective leadership, and then, what organizations are doing in practice that's creating.
I think the biggest gap is the fact that in practice, everything is messy.
Yeah.
And I try to teach that to my students as well, because when we're in the classroom, it's great. We have textbook reading. My slides are super
Yeah.
organized for them. You
Right.
should be transactional. That you should be transactional in that scenario. You should be transformational when you can. You should provide support when you can. But then in reality, all of those boundaries become really, really blurry. So
Hmm.
what's happening that day, even your own mood, how you wake up that morning, deadlines that are actually looming. I think when things are quiet, we all aspire to be our best leader,
Hmm.
but in practice, it's shifting at the same time. And my favorite approach to leadership is actually more of a contingency approach. In any specific situation with different type of employees, you actually also want to adapt your leadership style. So
Mm.
I think that's important. You're overseeing really senior people with expertise. They're proactive. They're independent workers. My advice is just let them do their things. Be there if they have questions and be a resource person, but don't start micromanaging your super competent employee. That's a waste of your time.
Hmm.
And the number one question I get from leaders is, how can I get more time? The answer is you can. You can just like manage the one you have better. So meaning learning how to delegate and keep actually also that time for mentoring and coaching the more junior employees who actually need that.
Mm.
So I think for me that's a big disconnect. And the second one would be, I think people really like to have a recipe about how I can be the best leader I can
Mm.
be. They want to read a book that will give them step by step how. And I don't believe in that. And I know some people try to sell that as well.
Mhm.
I'm gonna turn you to like the best leader you can be. I can give you tools. I can tell you that on every single day you won't be the same leader. I can help you identify your natural inclination in terms of what's your natural style of
Mhm.
leadership, and actually also help you learn about what might be your shortcomings or your flaws and how to work on them. For example, one of my consulting or education products, something that I teach will be emotional intelligence, how to connect with people, how to lead with more empathy and more openness toward the others, for example, because for some people, it's not their natural inclination.
Mhm.
So I think for me, and that was a really convoluted way of saying that it's not about a single formula. It's about practicing and leading in
Yeah.
practice and on a daily basis trying to be better than the day before.
Well, I love your 2 gaps. I cannot agree more because and I know this is we're not here to talk about me, but I kind of came to the same version of people critical skill set now is
Mm,
managing our time and calendars, and I wonder if this is something that you would not have been saying 5 years ago and or 10 years ago if you go back because to me it's like one of the things I've uncovered is just the world has gone so crazy and
mm,
transparent and accelerating in every
mhm.
direction that to me this like management of time and really personal energy, which you're also talking about how you're feeling today and like how's everything
Yeah.
going is become a critical skill set and really where leadership even starts, one would argue, because you can't do anything if you're not really managing yourself, your priorities, and your
Mhm.
energy well.
That's such a good point. And definitely in your own expertise, you've seen that both in terms of when you were in organization, when you work with organization. And I try to teach that to even my undergrad now. It's kind of like leadership starts from within. You need to lead yourself
Yes.
first.
Yes.
And always says, well, let's say you're a leader in an organization, someone does something poorly. The first step is, okay, did I set them to succeed or not? And
Right.
sometimes the answer is yes, and you did everything that you could, and you move outside of yourself, but you need to start with yourself because as a leader, you
Yes.
actually set the tone, and that's really important. But going back to time management for a second, I was meeting with a client last week,
Mhm.
and he was pretty much, I'm overwhelmed. I need to help me create more time in my day. And I'm like, I cannot help you create more time. I can help you like use your time better. And he's a fairly recent client that I mostly work with in individual coaching. And I say, let's look at your calendar. Let's do an activity and let's
Okay.
kind of like track your meetings, how you use your time and so on. And I give that to him as a homework before a following meeting. And the next meeting was last week. And the thing is, something that I saw with the pandemic is the multiplication of meeting because meeting on Zoom is so
Yes.
easy.
Yes.
And for some of them, their calendar is still overly inflated for that from that era of remote work where we'll just have too many touch base. I remember
Yep.
when I was working in a think tank at that time, we had a full team touch base on a daily basis. And
Mhm.
eventually we decreased to twice a week and once a week. And essentially what we managed to do in about half an hour is remove half of his meeting.
Yeah.
And that was 16 more hours in his week to do something else that
Yeah.
would actually generate more value, like strategic planning, which was one of his goals and all. So sometimes it's just about taking a really cold, hard look and a step back at where you're investing your time and what you can actually do to reshuffle things and what I like to call delegating to the floor. Or there are things that you can just drop.
Yeah, I love that.
Not to anyone, just like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be done. This meeting is useless, or that report
Yeah.
that we've been talking about for 4 years, it doesn't fit with your strategy currently. If we ever want to go back to it, we'll be start from scratch because anyway, this one is outdated. So let's just like
Yeah.
scrap it for now because now it's just pretty much a cumbersome potential remote to do items on someone list creating anxiety.
Just because we can do it, it doesn't mean we should, right? So
Yeah.
I love this, this starting with self and then going back to like, what are you doing? Like, how do I do better? Well, what are you doing today? Right. We have to start there and then going to connecting to the purpose of like, why is your meeting load, right? And like
Hmm.
the daily meeting served a serious purpose during the disconnected time during the COVID crisis, right? But now it's like you have to go back and be like, why? And the context has shifted, right? Like it's not needed. And then that's that powerful, you know, and I was connecting it to the purpose, to the outcomes you're actually wanting to push. That's how you have to be spending your time.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start as a leader. I cannot agree more. I used to always say this stuff like you think I have some masterful strategy. No, it's like starts with yourself and how you're actually spending
Exactly.
your days.
And crafting some purposeful time to think about those questions,
And
you
to
know?
think about that, yes, because if your calendars are overloaded, and yeah, I need to remind myself, but I saw some staggering statistic about in the hundreds of percentages that our meeting times have gone up, like as a whole, right? Like working, this again becomes a critical skill set. How do you manage your calendar? You have to have the time to even manage it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're slave to the calendar of just being, going, without strategy from thing to thing to thing. Check, check, check. I'm sure you agree, is not the path to leadership.
Oh, definitely. And you see that as well. Oftentimes, you end up in the trap of you're not actually leading, you're just managing crisis. Because
Yes.
if we want to invest time in
Yeah.
purposeful strategy planning, planning for the future, planning for example, now I work a lot with AI. So, how can we actually manage implementation or finding the time to upskill our employees and so on? You need some downtime to be able to just sit for a few hours, either by yourself or with
Yeah.
other senior people in your organization, and brainstorm that.
Yes.
And that purposeful, really value added thinking cannot just really happen in 15 minutes increment in between multiple meetings.
Yes. To create now we're tasked with a win becomes creating time to think is actually a
Yes.
very strategic, clear path forward, right? Yes.
And it is.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
because we have to do it. And I see oftentimes a chronic lack of just leaders having the time to do the more abstract strategic thinking that is required of them, which is
Yeah.
why they're at the top because they have the big picture
In mind.
perspective,
Yeah.
but they need to take advantage of that to just sit back, look at it, and plan.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I cannot agree with that more. So I'd love to go transition to that second point you made because I also think it's equally
Mm.
powerful. Is there's no script recipe for this is how 1 2 3 you will become a best leader. If there was, we would all be great leaders because there's so much written on the subject. Like somebody would have nailed
Yes.
the recipe right by now, right? Like so I love your perspective of it's more about giving you the tools, the fundamental tools, and then it's about you putting your actual inclinations in action, your expertise in action in the context of your organization, your team, your role. And then you're putting those tools into action
Hmm.
properly. That's really what is gonna, step by step get you delivering results that you seek, right?
Hmm.
So I love that perspective. I just wonder, to me, it's like, what are some of the good ways you've seen for people to be given those tools? Because I think also this is a bit of a gap in how we're doing this fundamentally. So I just would love your thoughts on, how is it that we can make these tools available to people?
That's a really good question.
Mm.
I'm going to answer in a few points. I think based on my research, because I've been researching, for example, barriers in organization, how to create better work environment, active leadership, and so on. One of the main barriers is time for training, upskilling, and reskilling.
Mm.
A big part of what I do, and I'm not here to advertise my service, that's not the point, but you need time to train leaders and
Yeah.
actually sometimes also like mid-level employees that will be transitioning in leadership position. So things, for example, one of the things that I do sometimes with clients is, for example, I will be doing 16 half days or depending on what they need, depending on different topics and leadership related skills. So for
Uh-huh.
example, communication, strategic planning,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, managing conflict, and so on. But it needs time. You need to actually free people
Yeah.
up to be in a conference room practicing and so on for like half an hour, half a day. And I do like to spread those training over time because my goal is always after half a day, my homework for you is pick one thing and start applying it. And when
Uh-huh.
you're comfortable and it becomes natural, pick a second thing.
Uh-huh.
I think the disaster about leadership training is the same thing as, for example, when people start training after Christmas time. I will go 6 days a week. And
Right.
then after 4 weeks, they
Right.
don't go anymore. So
Right.
you don't change or improve or evolve as a leader in a drastic way. So it's really improve one behavior. And then when that becomes natural, move to the next. Because I did like the example about people reading so many leadership books, and that's great. It's like the same people who are reading cookbooks all the time, but then never cook a single recipe. I love this book, but will you actually make that 3 layer
Yeah.
chocolate cake? So
Yes.
it's really about read one book, have one training, then implement one thing, then do a different training, and so on. So it's also the main reason why when I do work on long mandate with client, I usually will be spreading those multiple training sessions, either half days or days, over a few weeks or months. So there's actually
Yes.
time to really assimilate and do their homework in between session. Because if
Yes.
I just cram it all into 2 weeks, it's just too much to assimilate and too much for them to really pick one thing to start integrating. And
Yeah.
by the time they're at number two, everything is like a cram from, I think we saw that like 12 weeks ago when he was here last.
Yes.
So I do like to spread training for that reason
Yeah. I think the
as
good
well.
news, good news here is that you share that these leadership skills can be taught. So I
Yes.
would start with that because sometimes I feel like there's this kind of like underlining belief system that you're born a leader. Sometimes we talk about
Yes.
that, right? You're like a born leader, lucky for him or her. Look how great
Yes.
of a leader she
Yes.
is. like it's like you're dealt leadership cards and you got one and you
Yes.
did it. So to me, I think it's like what you're talking about is it's a skill. So like any
Oh,
skill,
yes.
we can learn it, but then on the flip side, you have to take time to do it. So it's like take the
Yes.
investment if you want. And what I started talking about is building like these habits of like leadership. It's like a because it's not a one-time thing. It's like
I love that.
okay, and that to me touches on what you're talking about. It needs time, repetition, because then when we think about it as a habit, we can think about some of the things we do know about habits. It takes time to form
Hmm.
habits. Like I want to start, if I'm going to be an active listener, to use your example, like I'm talking, take a communication course, I have to think about developing, becoming an active listener, not just doing communication, like being a person, right, who actually
Hmm.
communicates. And to be really effective like that, that's going to take me some time. And that's
Oh,
what we have to
yes.
start creating space for together.
And we're going back to the same notion of like, you need to craft the time.
You have to create the
Which is
time.
always the big issue,
Yes.
because that's really one of the main barriers I see in research and in practice is time.
Hmm.
Of course, budget for some organization because investing in training, upskilling, and reskilling can be expensive.
Yes.
But at the same time, they have to do it to adapt. The cycle of skills evolution is becoming quicker and quicker. So
Yes.
it's always a worthy investment. Like you see the impact, whether
Yes.
they take courses online, whether they hire a corporate trainer or a consultant, that is really, really important for them to do.
Yes.
So I think we need to foster that aspect and actually also creating training that are really connected to organization. I always say my approach, like, and I don't have shelf product that I actually sell to clients. All of my approach is always custom because depending on organization, industry, organization, their challenges are different. So I
Yes.
think it's really about really being specific, but at the same time, they are things that we can do more generally.
Yes.
One of my research project that actually turned into an actual platform when I was at the Diversity Institute was a learning management system that we
Mm,
created in collaboration with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and it's called SkillsBridge.
mm,
And the aim at first was to really help small and medium-sized organizations because they tend to struggle the most in terms of accessing training because limited budget, limited
mhm,
staff. So oftentimes everything is a crunch. So the aim was a platform with high quality asynchronous training, but really emphasizing high quality, actionable, grounded in best practices, latest evidence that would be accessible, that could actually be fraction in micro learning increment.
mhm.
Because oftentimes you don't have the time to like just be sitting in front of your computer for 6 hours. And we do see impact. So creating different types of training for different organization,
Yeah.
because sometimes a really small business cannot be affording to hire, for example, like someone like you or someone like me to do training
Yeah.
because it's too expensive for their needs. So having multiple ways of supporting organization to acquire new skills and all, and also
Mhm.
really following the research in terms of what are really the skills that are needed. Sometimes there's
Yeah.
a big gap between organization, what they feel they need and what they
Yeah.
actually need.
Yeah.
And research tend to be supporting that. And my guess is that you see that as well in your practice.
I feel like I do. I see that there's, and then what I feel like when I saw some of those gaps, I say I couldn't unsee them.
Mm,
And some of the, and I think you're right. There is some parts, and that's certainly what we are doing with I Live Performance is bringing some of what I like to call fundamentals. So to me, there's
yes.
these the time management and sustainable performance. There's just fundamental habits. They might look different integrated into your life, or like how I choose to hydrate,
Mm,
move, nourish is might be different than how you choose to, but we need to each have an answer for how is it that we're protecting our body and mind that for sustainability of it all. And then likewise for me, there's like what I really double down on is this leadership fundamentals that I think
mhm.
that's what you're talking about because there's some parts yes, that are specific to the organization and to the person and the challenge you're facing, but there's some things that are just
Oh, yes.
true, right? Like 101, like business acumen 101, working with others 101. There's some elements that are and that's what we are that are really fundamental, but shockingly is really unaddressed or giant gap. That's what we are trying to
Oh,
do.
yes.
Yeah.
I often give it as an example because it was shocking to me when I started doing executive leadership how much I needed to teach about just basic communication.
Yes. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
reminding people it's a loop. It's not just about like
Yeah.
screaming orders or sending an email. It's about, having this conversation,
Yeah.
ensuring understanding,
Yeah.
expectations,
Yeah.
still being present for follow-ups. And I still do a lot of that work. And at first I never thought I would be teaching about communication because for
Yeah.
me it was just it's a basic, but it's a basic that people forget that oftentimes we need to go back to. So yes, those fundamentals are really, really important. So creating those kind of, I would say like multi-level training that you
Yeah.
can actually adapt at the same time, really understanding different industries and different needs in many ways, and
Mhm.
really trying to find a way to help organization create more time, but actually also seeing the value of really crafting the time. Because I think they do, but they
Mhm.
don't enough.
Very
Because
nice. Yeah.
oftentimes at first I see, yeah, training is great,
Mhm.
but then the after is like, yeah, training is really essential.
Yes. To me, and I love that you're talking about the investment. I want to. It's such a worthwhile investment because I see, of course, and I know I understand. I was an executive. I understand from the internal
Hmm.
looking, budgets are always limited. Like there's competing priorities at all times. Like unless you're not a successful business, right? That's actually like I'm like if you're having these problems, it's a good problem to have. That's I like
Yes.
first flip it that way. But I like the way you're talking about where the investment because it's like one of the things I like to highlight is how an organization, by definition, is making an investment in each person because they are
Hmm.
funding their salary for a specific role, right? That they've deemed to be a value creation role of some kind, right? Like, and so it's really shocking to me sometimes when we like not shocking, surprising, not surprising again, that we don't think, okay, but to get that person performing at their best in alignment with what we need them to be doing, that we have to look at that as a win-win. Yes, realistic
Hmm.
obstacles to those budgets, but it has to be worth it. It's got to be fundamentally by design worthwhile because you already are investing way more than that than the cost of training into them just by the fact that they're
Oh,
there, like
definitely.
in a funded position.
And if you invest in them, where do they invest that back? It's into your organization.
Yes,
Sometimes I hear some hesitancy from some leaders who say like, yeah, but now people tend to stay in organization for a shorter time. So why would I invest in them if
right.
they go and use their skills elsewhere? It's still beneficial for the times it lasts.
Yes,
They will still be there for a couple of years. So you invest in them because you believe in their development. For the time being, they will actually invest that back into you.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be permanent, but at the same time, it can actually also foster loyalty because if you give them a stronger sense of purpose, a stronger sense of
yes,
you believing in their development, that will actually give them more motivation. And where do they invest that? Into their organization because
and
they
maybe,
sense that they have
yeah.
more meaningfulness and more impact.
Yeah. That's where, I mean, to me, in my opinion, that's where some of those engagement numbers come in, right? Because you're like, who
Hmm.
doesn't, that's who people are disengaging, staying. Those are not necessarily the right metrics to be looking at, right?
Oh,
Because
yes.
like we have, yeah, perfect. Yeah. So that's what I was going to say, like with your research, I would just love to get your thoughts on maybe some of the numbers and kind of the conversations took us there. Like, have you seen one of the things I think happens a lot is we use our subjectivity a lot in
Hmm.
choosing in the training as management in investing in the training, in selecting who gets the training, right? Like when they get it. So I would just wonder if you have any data or, from or your experience to show and to share about what are some of the metrics that we should be looking at, with link to like investment into leadership, or the performance we get out of it from
That's a
that.
really good point. And you bring in an important things that I do like to implement with clients most of the time, especially with the company is big enough. Let's do surveys. Let's try to measure impact as much as possible. Let's try to gather
Mhm,
information for employees. When you have a really small business, oftentimes you pretty much need to rely on a focus group, which you need to build trust first. But
mm,
if you're large enough, do surveys and try to have metrics. But yes, we do have scales. For example, we can actually measure skill improvement.
mm,
That's important. When I do training for with clients, I always do satisfaction surveys, you
mhm,
know. It's really hard, for example, after a session to measure if they really have acquired a new skill, but if they
mhm,
perceive this as valuable, if they would take it again, it's
mhm,
still a signal that it was insightful and that they will leave with something to think about.
mhm,
So that's important at the same time. So just measuring satisfaction will be important. And then after that, later in time, yes, you can measure skill improvement. And oftentimes you can do that through, yes, regular job evaluation. You can develop metrics that actually exist, for example,
mhm,
scales about measuring skills. So oftentimes you need to find a way to do that through, for example, specific tasks.
mhm.
So it is kind of a challenging thing to measure in a really, really precise granular level, but you can still evaluate trends, satisfaction. Yes, you can really measure skills at the same time. Engagement over time, you can actually also track retention
Mhm.
in many ways.
Yeah.
How many people actually show up to the training, especially if it's optional, if it's mandatory at the same time. Again, going back to my previous point about measuring satisfaction and engagement.
I know. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I was working with leaders on is also going back to connecting some of these investments to the outcomes that you're trying to get.
Yes.
So to me, it's like you made that connection already with retention, engagement. Those are really big business outcomes that
Oh, yes.
connect to organizational performance, right?
Hmm.
So to me, it's also like, these are some of the conversations to be having, is also to be like, how do you measure, effective training that integrates into people's lives and work is going to actually move the needle on those business outcomes they
Hmm.
care about. And to me, this is a really great direction to take some of these conversations versus defending budgets on emotions or feelings, right? We can be actually saying, oh no, look at what it's doing for the business.
Exactly, because we know from about a few decades of research,
Hmm.
so since even before I was born in the mid 90s, that retention, motivation, employees' engagement is linked to just being more profitable
Yes. Yes.
because they
Absolutely.
do better for the
Yeah.
organization. They're more creative, they're more innovative. It's the same thing, for example, when because I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Mm,
It's the same thing. We know that more diverse organization outperform or other
mhm,
organization because you have more inclusive work environment, more
mhm,
motivation, more retention. Like the
mhm.
business case for it is really, really strong. So I really like that you bring that up. It is a business imperative because we are business people. We
Yes.
are in the environment of making business successful. I
Yes.
do believe that something should be done purely for ethical or moral reason, but it's much easier to convince business to do it if you can tell
Yes.
them it's actually also good for your bottom line.
Yes. And then exactly, we have to move these conversations beyond being the right thing, although
Exactly.
you and I and many others would find that to be true. We got to move it into a business case discussion, right? The
Yeah.
narrative and showing the needs, the research. But again, that takes time and discipline, right? So it takes time to think about it, discipline
Hmm.
to commit the time and then budgets towards this path forward. But again, we have to, this is where we kind of have to trust the data to share, to be moving the organization in the right direction.
Yes. It's about also convincing organization to start tracking numbers more. Because
Yeah.
again, what gets measured gets done. We often use that for profitability, for product and sales, but we can actually move
Yes.
that to training, diversity targets, and so on. Like, are we meeting the target? How can we actually assess benchmark?
Yes.
Nothing will never be purely objective in business. For example,
Yes.
performance evaluation, what is good performance, for example? But we can try to make it a bit more objective by having clearer measure, clearer benchmark at the same time, and really having more observation and ongoing discussion. So that's a really, I think, important point as well.
Yes. Absolutely. I want to ask you about. So here we're always talking. So we're always love talking about performance, right? That's ultimately
Mm,
why you invest in leadership development,
yes.
is to get individual performance and then ultimately organizational performance, right? But I've also shed a light on when we look at sustainable performance. I think it still includes the element of personal sustainable
Mm.
performance because you want to be in it for the longer term, no matter what. It's otherwise anybody, to me, it's like anybody can get a big project done, but can you work to consistently deliver value for
Yes.
in your role, your team, and organization? So I would just love your thoughts on the role you think organizations have to play in building that sustainable performance flow for their people and teams versus,
Yeah.
burnout flow, I would say.
That's a very good question, and
Yeah.
that I was talking about yesterday, actually.
Oh, cool.
I think we still underemphasize the importance of mental health and well-being.
Yeah, agreed.
And I was talking to that to my students. Your dream job is still a job. You can still burn out from a dream job if you don't take
Yeah.
time off, if you don't actually value balance. And I always tell them, like, I have a really high level. I don't like the term workaholic, so I do say I have a high level of like work
Yeah.
centricism because I do work a lot. But I'm also mindful of, for example, I have my own personal benchmark in the sense that what ensures that even if I work a lot, I still have balance. So for me, for
Mhm.
example, is how many times I will be seeing my friends in a week and how many times I go to the gym.
Mm.
So if let's say like 1 week, I'm only going to the gym 2 or 3 times, I know that I'm somewhat of balance. If it's been 2 or 3 weeks, I need to course correct, for
Yes.
example, because
Mhm.
I know that's what I need to actually optimize my own performance, my well-being, my mental
Mhm.
health as well. Same thing in terms of do I see my friends, for example, like 3, 4 times a week
Mhm.
for coffee, dinner, and so on. So now you don't have the time to, for example, go for dinner for 4 hours.
Yeah.
But I know all of those things are actually what keeps me sane.
Yes.
And I often do that, for example, with leaders I work with. If you're a CEO or VP or even a middle
Mhm.
manager who's actually trying to climb your way up, you will have to work a lot.
Yeah.
But you need to establish what kind of dynamics, what kind of resources or ritual you have that will actually keep you sane. And you need to develop mechanism to actually protect them. Of course, sometime 1 week is off, you have a crazy
Yes.
deadline, you need to work
Yeah.
overtime, and you will have to be off balance. That's fine. But you need to course correct and reestablish balance. So that's a key aspect that
Yeah.
I think we need to emphasize more at a very individual level. First of all, understanding
Yeah.
yourself, what is conducive to you, and at an organizational level. But I'm curious before that, like, what are your mechanisms to ensure that you don't burn out and that you
Yeah, thank you. I'm
remain
so
at your
glad I
optimal
could.
best?
Yeah, I absolutely. This is the crux of my product or
Mm,
service. This is what, and I stands for intentional living. And to
yeah.
me, it's exactly like expanding those sustainable performance habits, not just using them at work. Like, what are my priorities at work, which I think, again, a lot of us can do more on. But it's actually my big premise is that we have to expand them across all aspects of life to really
Mm,
truly be at our best as human beings first and foremost, and then show up at work that way is the premise like of behind the basically turning performance upside down. I think how we look at it, because I think traditionally a lot of times we are looking at it like, let's upskill ourselves in this like technical or subject matter expertise,
hmm
and then we're, first of all, dropping some of those leadership skills that are, fundamental. But then secondly, we're not actually managing ourselves across and we run into trouble. And I say I came across this I'm no exception to it. So I came across this exactly as a leader, VP of a fast growing company, proudly, I call it full body commitment to my role, which I loved and
hmm
energized me, and I love my team and all of that. The rest of my kids, there was nothing else that was I was running regularly too. And it basically adds up. And you're exactly, to me, it's like I could have said the same thing, day, week, couple of months, that's fine. But if we start adding up year after year of that, you get into trouble. So to me, it's this skill again, and to build these habits that that I have awareness of what's happening so that I can course correct as needed. No perfection, but just having a lens of like there's no perfect, you know, balance in a day, a week, a month, but it's like
hmm
it can be juggle it's a bit of a juggling act that we each have to figure out on our own how that works.
It should not be perfection.
No
I heard
perfection.
it
Yes.
once, I'm forgetting by whom, but perfection is the enemy of excellence because you
Yes.
miss excellence on your way to perfection.
Yes.
And it's a big problem. And I like hearing that. But yeah, it's really about being intentional about that.
Yes.
And then beyond your individual role in managing yourself, I think we also need to talk about institutional policies and practices.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in mental health days
Yes.
that you can take for whatever reason. Because let's be honest, sick days have been a norm for a very long time. And funnily enough, even with an organization where you have unlimited sick days, we tend to see people underusing them. But a
Yeah.
sick day is not a recharge day. I've never heard someone like I was sick from work because I had stomach flus and I came back 2 days later. I was completely rejuvenated. You don't relax when you take a sick days. A
Yeah.
recharge day for me is you can take it of course, meetings and so on, but it's kind of a day. I don't have a doctor's appointment. My kid is sick. I'm not sick myself. I just need to not be at work today.
Yeah.
I need to do whatever else, whether it's watching a movie, going for a long walk. And I think that that should be a more well established practice. I've actually implemented that with many clients. I've
Yeah.
worked in an organization where we actually had one recharge day per quarter.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good practice to have as well. And I also do believe that we need to maintain the best of the hybrid world. I don't believe in fully
Yeah.
remote work. I think it brings really complex issues in terms of performance,
Yeah.
in terms of motivation, in terms of turnover. But I do believe that we can find a happy medium, recognizing that people have complex lives and that flexibility does not actually matter if the works get done. I
I
do
agree.
believe in having core working hours.
Yeah. To me, I love your points too. It brings, again, intentionality to me always. A lot of it is like,
Yeah.
well, why, what's the purpose of the in-person time? What's the purpose
Mm.
of your at home time, right? If it's all connected to outcomes and you understand what it's doing for you, your organization, everybody wins, right? Like but it's more, we get in trouble when we're just doing things as check boxes or scripted,
Yeah.
and then we're like, we kind of lose connection to the purpose, the why behind it all, and then just end up being
Yes.
in the checkbox monkeys. And we definitely run into trouble these days if you just start trying to do everything, because
Hmm.
that you can just swallow it up with the demands that are coming at us as people and work, the workforce in
That's a
today's
really good
world.
point. Like
Yeah,
we just finalized it. I just finalized that with a mandate with a client a few weeks ago. And essentially, after doing stakeholder meetings with different groups in their organization, which they determine what would be like the best schedule in terms of balancing needs and preferences for flexibility. But at the same time, because I do believe that in person time is important for team building, cohesiveness,
exactly. For what?
planning for the
Yes, yes,
organization.
exactly.
Like, you don't force people to come into the office if they can do that specific task at home in their pajama.
Yes,
Some people will still prefer to be in the office, let them be, but some people actually want to be able to work in a more flexible way.
yeah,
So what we did is on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, their core business hour in person of like 10 a.m. to about like 3 p.m. So meetings
uh
will be happening there, strategy lunch as well. And
yes.
outside of that, pending a specific meeting or event,
You're
work
getting
when
a
you
little, yeah,
want, how you want, from where you want, as long as you're meeting your deadlines and your deliverables.
yeah.
And so far, it's been working really, really well because you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, to me, it's all exactly that intentionality is, it really kind of ends up working out for everyone. And I want to go back to, I like also what you brought up. There's this, well, progress over perfection has been one of the
Mm,
key guiding
hmm.
principles that it really took even, I kind of honed that even in my VP role for over the years. I was definitely a perfectionist. And a lot of times like society drives us into that. And I know you work with like DE and I, so I know there's probably an element of, as women, there's like extra little bit of perfectionism that's
Yes.
thrust upon us. So there's this idea, and for me, it's always like top student, engineering, yay, consulting definitely took me down the path of perfection is the way. But really, like the switch that has to happen is that it's progress over perfection. And they can look, that's where you get in the good, the bad, and the ugly. But that's when you start to really start making some meaningful personal changes that work in the context of your life and career, versus, waiting for perfection. And I really think you brought up a really interesting point on, to me, and I talked about, an intentional living path is like, there's personally, we can take more power over doing more, like setting
Mm,
boundaries, focusing on taking advantage of the mental health days, actually doing that, not like also, renoing a toilet because that's what we double tasking ourselves with whatever is going on in our
true.
life. But there's also a systemic role, systemic things that we don't control as individuals, but organizations can be helping people.
Hmm.
Somewhere in the middle is really, both are needed, right? Sometimes I feel like,
True.
people can get into these, is it a personal problem or is it a systemic problem? And we get into like an argument over that, where it's kind of like both need to move forward to
Oh,
really help
definitely.
for real results, right? The answer is both.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. Like we saw during the pandemic, for example, with the Zoom and remote work, for example, women, for example, with kids running in the background where someone being perceived as disorganized while
Right,
fathers were just being perceived, oh, he's so great in multitasking and doing
right,
everything.
right.
There was a little article coming out at the time of, are we going to actually moving back to the 50s because of those double standard?
Mm,
So we need to be really mindful of that because implicit biases are still really much present. I do bias training. I do still research
mhm.
that creating inclusion. And I know it's becoming more controversial, but at the very core of it, the simple aspect of it is just that people should have a fair chance to succeed. And there are systemic barriers in place, so the field is not even. So
Right.
instead of like doing this and like people can merit, actually we have this, and some people need to work twice as much to merit.
Yes.
I work an article recently, relying a lot on the Emilio Castilla's work from MIT,
Mhm.
but essentially he's been researching meritocracy for a very long time, and meritocracy is just as biased as anything else. It is a social contract. So what is merit? Who merits? And we do see that even by propping meritocracy in people, in senior managers evaluating, they tend to over reward men for equal performance.
Mhm.
So merit is as biased as everything else. Actually, equity is really about just finding a way to remove those barriers so
Mhm.
that people can have a fair shot at success.
Yeah. That
It
that
should
makes
not be more controversial than that because it shouldn't be. We're just
yeah.
acknowledging that some people face barrier and we
Yeah.
should do work to actually remove that so that the best people can actually succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I know. So I'm going to ask you a couple of power questions as we,
Mm,
wrap up. So I know that you work on aligning leadership, processes, culture, and strategy when you're supporting innovation and performance development in organizations. And when I saw this in your work, I thought, wow, those are four big power elements, right? And definitely can see the power of alignment of them. But when you work with clients and organizations where
mm.
it's misaligned, which is likely, where you get involved,
Oftentimes.
what is it, how do you find where do you start shifting things first? Because those are all big giants, right? Like you listed. So I just
Oh, yeah.
yeah, just a practical view at, what do you think is to get started?
It's where the researcher in me becomes really useful as a consultant because I approach
Okay.
it as a research project. So it's really about establishing a framework, a research question, objectives, and all. But I always say it's always about, first of all, first step for everything is getting to know the people. So stakeholders' involvement and just me being in the trenches, asking people, having focus group at different
Mhm.
level, building trust as well. So establishing a roadmap to what needs to be changed. I would say the number one thing that I feel I face as the first challenge is that most of my clients at first talk about symptoms, but what I'm looking for is the root cause,
Yeah.
which sometimes tends to maybe make them a bit more afraid because the root cause is more challenging and all
Yeah.
encompassing to address than the symptoms. So I would say, yeah, the communication aspect is the first thing. Then that is really getting people's buy-in. Things
Mhm.
will change. There will be some
Mhm.
discomfort. And this is one, two, three ways that we will help and support you in the change process. The change aspect that is the most challenging is always a discomfort. What will happen to me? What will happen
Right.
to my job? All the way from intern to senior leaders who are used to managing organization a certain way.
Yes.
So, but it's really about really creating that sense of trust that we're not leaving you behind. You're not being pushed aside.
Right.
It's really a process of change that we will all be inside together. And after that, I will tend to prioritize what needs to come first and what needs to come last. And usually I try to just create something that actually makes sense for what the problem is. Like, what is the biggest problem? The structure, the culture, the industry changing. So we need to prioritize that. Like, the most challenging one is always the culture because culture is abstract.
Yeah.
So it's like I can change your culture with a piece of paper on the table and that's done. Changing the culture is really about changing beliefs, values, ways of doing things, deeply held, sometimes preferences.
Hmm.
Going back to my previous point, it's really about communication in that sense. It's really a communication exercise, a reassurance exercise for people,
Hmm.
and really getting into the buy in. And I'm always really strong when I do those things that leaders need to be involved.
Hmm.
You can rely on a consultant, but you're still the leader and you need to be
Yes.
there to reassure your people. I don't like leaders who are hiding from difficult conversation.
Yeah, of
Because
course.
sometimes the answer will be, I don't know yet. I see you. I hear
Yeah.
your concern and your fears, but I'm going to keep you informed as we know more.
Yeah.
And I've seen too many leaders who are afraid of having those conversation because they feel vulnerable as well.
Mm.
And sometimes they just, it's kind of the leadership aspect of you need to also be a leader in more complex time.
Yeah.
It's fun when it's fun, but you need to also be there when it's more complex.
Yes. Yeah. Ultimately, we're all people, right? So leader, even if you put, like leader top of his game, is still a person, right? So they'll have the
Yes.
same challenges as anybody else that is having them, but connecting over those is the critical factor, right? Like like you said,
Yeah.
going back to where people communicating, and then I would say, I don't know. I think you shared a really beautiful. It's like there's always those. It's again, I think goes back to the earlier. You can be given the tools, the frameworks, the roadmaps, the things that work, but it's going to be about applying it to that organization, integrating it with where they're trying to
Hmm.
do, and then prioritizing again, like where are we gonna go at this together, or, moving in sync. It's always like there's no simple playbook, but it's kind of
Yeah.
it's interesting how it's like with the tools you can do, just like with just even physical tools, you can do a lot when you're actually applying them to the right project at the time.
Exactly. Like create a game plan. Every game plan will be
Yeah,
unique because you're willing to tackle the problem in the right order,
yeah.
get the leadership and everybody to buy in, and try to actually also adopt feedback seeking behavior. As the stakeholders impacted their thoughts, do
Hmm.
they have any suggestion? Sometimes they will propose something that cannot be done. And my approach to that is I hear you. This is why we can address that
Uh,
for now, but I'm going to keep a note of that. And again, involving leadership in terms of that as well, because they are the force in the environment. So they need to also be there. But it's really also about providing all of those wraparound supports from just having those conversation, the coaching, the training, the leadership, how we will bring you up with us as we're changing.
nice. Well, Simon, I've enjoyed. There's so many things that I feel like we could talk for hours on this subject matter, and I would love to keep the conversation going. I like to do a thing with my guests. I like to give everybody a magic wand because who doesn't want to
Mm,
have a magic one of
true.
those?
And I was a
So,
Harry Potter fan growing up, so
okay, there you go. So, I want to give you a magic wand. It's super powerful in your hands because you're so well versed in the subject matter. But so, considering leaders that are listening to us today and are wanting to build a more sustainable, high performing culture in their organization, if you could use your magic wand to help them set them on the right path, what should they start doing tomorrow that they are likely not doing today?
one thing,
Yes, because that's the prioritization back at you.
if you can start creating a culture of one-on-one meeting to really build trust with your employees, because they will become an invaluable source of ideas, of innovation, creativity, and they will feel safer to really give their best to your organization because they will feel valued, seen, and really supported.
Nice.
Uh, yeah. So leaders just get in there and be there for your people. Because yes, you're at the center of it, but you only exist
Yeah,
because people are gravitating around you. You
yeah,
might be the sun, but you need the full ecosystem of planets around you
yeah.
to actually succeed.
Yeah, and that's a good place to start no matter what. I like that because I would highlight too, like if you don't have one where you're pushing for innovation and growth, this can be a good place to start because you can at least be understanding what the challenges are, obstacles,
Yes.
getting into the thoughts, right? So you can be using the, that nurturing those one-on-one connections can, depending on the where you are in the journey, can be a
Yeah.
source of just gathering your problems, connecting to build trust, and then it can evolve into, you know, uh, proper path forward org wide, right? So it
Yeah.
applies to everybody at any time.
And I'll add like a tiny second one,
Yes,
but really
please, absolutely.
craft the time for strategic planning. Cause I know oftentimes it's too
Create
much
the
on the back
time.
burner. Like you need to plan for the future. You need to be agile. It does not happen if you don't make it happen.
That's right. And okay, I will always give you extra magic one power for the making time for
You
for
told me you
this.
gave me a powerful one, so I'm using it for all of its power.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Simon, for sharing your thoughts and the good work you're doing out there with our audience today. Thank you so much for making the time, the most
Thank you so
valuable
much,
resource.
Sandra. I'm really looking forward to their feedback, and if they want to connect, they can join me on LinkedIn. I'm really happy to connect with anyone who wants to talk more further.
Perfect, perfect. So that's the best place to find you, right, Simon, on LinkedIn
Yes, yes,
directly.
it's my
Perfect.
only
And
social
we'll publish
media.
all of those links with the episode as well.
Thank you
Awesome.
so much, Sandra.